So we've just passed the second anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. Um, what can be said? This is, I think, a very uncertain time for the Ukrainians, and it has to be said that there can be no complacency with the way this is going. Putin's far from beaten. It's true that, as Vladimir Klitschko said, this war was not won in a few days as Putin expected. Part of that is the incredible courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people. I think it has strong echoes of the resistance movements in World War II. The other thing is, of course, Western support. Let's be honest. Without Western support, I don't think Ukraine could have come this far. Although the resolve of the Ukrainian people probably would have persisted. Um, Rishi Sunak made the point in the speech to the Ukrainian parliament in the 1942 moment. Now, I've mentioned that a few times in other videos about this. Um, and I think it was an apt comparison because there is a lot of uncertainty about where this goes. It may well be that Ukraine does in the end make some concessions, but that's a very painful price to pay. And I would say, people watching the situation in the United States or India, and I specifically quote those two countries because they're the world's two biggest democracies. In the case of the US, you have the Republicans in Congress who are obviously very reluctant to further funding for Ukraine. And in the case of India, I think they've had a very shady so called neutral position on this war. I say so called because when you sit on the fence, you are aiding the oppressor. I do believe that. So I think the Modi government has failed in its leadership to condemn Russia's actions as the world's biggest democracy. But what I would say to people in the US, Republicans in the US, or pro Putin Indians, imagine if the price of peace was to, say, give up Florida and a few other states, or to give up West Bengal, right? Because essentially that's what the Ukrainians would be asked to do, to give up a big chunk of their territory. Now, every war has to come to an end at some point, and I suspect even in Ukraine there will be some war fatigue. Um, but I think that the worst outcome would be to give Putin what he wants. The worst outcome would be to give a green light to the Russian dictator that he could just take a big chunk of Ukraine, or there's uh, a peace that is entirely in Russia's interests. That isn't a true peace. That is servitude. One of the worst war crimes committed during this invasion, and there's been many, is the mass deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. Um, on this second anniversary, it's a sobering reminder, I think, of the incredible suffering the Ukrainians have been through. Yes, incredible resilience, but suffering too. Bucha, Mariupol, Kramatorsk. Shame on those who deny Russia's war crimes. Shame on those who continue to further Russian propaganda, whether it be Russian state mouthpieces, whether it be useful idiots in Europe, whether it be third countries that are sitting on the fence like India, and you have Indian state outlets that are advocating for Putinism, whether it be US publications like The Hill. Um, of course, that isn't the whole picture. There's many other outlets that do cover Russia's war crimes, but the cost of this has been incredible. Now, I don't think we'll ever know the true toll of the Ukrainian war, uh, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Obviously, there's been a conflict in this part of the world since 2014, the Donbass War. About 14,000 people died in that conflict in 8 years. But this stage has been incredibly costly. Zelensky's just quoted a figure of 31,000 Ukrainian troops killed. We don't know how many injured. I have seen a figure of 50,000 amputations, which actually surpasses the 41,000 of British soldiers in World War One. And talking of World War One, the fighting around Bakhmut has been compared to Passchendaele, such as its intensity. With the war in Israel and Gaza, this is, with the second anniversary, there's been a lot of attention on Ukraine, but It's one of those things where people get war fatigue and it's like, oh, well, that's just another war zone. But Ukraine today, Estonia tomorrow, Moldova tomorrow. I do not believe Putin, with his irredentist obsessions, will stop at Ukraine. And I think, he's a liar. He's a proven liar. And what he said to Tucker Carlson about not wanting to invade Poland, well, I don't think Putin's about to invade Poland. But the point here is Putin's foreign policy is based on irredentist obsessions. I do think actually Putin may be clinically paranoid. I think he may actually be showing the sort of signs that those old Soviet dictators did, the likes of Yuri Andropov, for example. Where does this all go? I don't know. But I do think this is an ideological battle. My concern is a peace deal now would just be a green light to the Russian dictator at a time when he's killed his most prominent opposition leader in Alexei Navalny, when he's buoyed up. It's hard to say though what's going on in Russia because the Russian economy's been hit. Yet it's a vast country. It still has links to China, although I would say China's a senior partner. Russia's been, isolated in many international institutions, but it still goes on. Russia, it is a powerful country. There's no getting around that. I honestly don't know where all of this goes, but history must record what's happened. History must record how Russia has brutalized the Ukrainian people. And people can talk about NATO expansion. I covered this in a previous video. The fact of the matter is, countries are joining NATO. Sweden's just been approved now. It's overcome the last hurdles, I understand, precisely because of Russia's aggression. Russia's its own worst enemy. I've just completed a very good book by the journalist Luke Harding about the paranoia inside Medvedev's Russia in the late 2000s, when relations ostensibly were somewhat better. And that's an eye opener. It's called Mafia State. I'll just close this up. This is an ideological battle, and even if the US gives up on Ukraine under toxic Trump, I think Europeans should continue supporting it. Now, I get it. If people in Texas or Arizona, their main issue isn't Ukraine, it's the border. I understand that, and I don't blame them for that. But I do think America loses the right to call itself the leader of the free world if it doesn't continue supporting Ukraine. Yes, it's costly, but as Ukrainians have pointed out, it's costly in arms and money, but they're literally laying down their lives. We'll never know the true toll of this. I mean, the Balkan Wars of the 90s or the Yugoslav Wars, anything from 100,000 to 250,000 dead. I think the Ukraine war is going to be a similar figure. It'll be hard to know, including all the Russian dead. I don't think Russia's being honest about its true dead. I think it's probably at least 50,000 if I was to guess, given the extent of the intensity that they faced. And added to that, all the Ukrainian civilians. I think a figure of 100,000 would be a reasonable estimate, but we'll never know the true toll. But those who want to advocate for Russia, look at history. Ukraine has been brutalized by Russia before, the Holodomor, one of the worst crimes of the 20th century. I think this is an uncertain time. I don't think Ukraine, I don't think this is a point where it's kind of on the ascendancy. There is a lot of doubt. But there was a lot of doubt in 1942 as well, and yet the Allies overcame that. Now, I do believe this is an ideological struggle against evil. I think Putin's irredentist wars is evil. I think the human rights abuses that the Russian forces perpetrate are repugnant. I think the Russian lies are repugnant, and I think Putin's supporters are morally bankrupt. I'm not neutral on this thing. I never have been. And so I say SLAVA Ukraini. There may be concessions in the end, but what cannot be allowed to happen is Putin simply allowed to have his way, because he will never stop. Slava Ukraini. That's how I feel about this situation.